A World Cup player has effectively had his tournament erased, and somehow the most controversial part is not the tackle itself. It is what happened after, because FIFA has now handed Qatar's Asim Medivo a 5-match suspension over the challenge that broke Canada's Ismael Cohn's leg, and that number matters. 5 matches is not a routine punishment. 5 matches is not a heat-of-the-moment decision. 5 matches is FIFA making a statement. The problem is, the statement they seem to be making is one that terrifies almost everyone who has looked closely at this case. Because the deeper you go, the harder it becomes to tell whether Medivo is being punished for what he did or for what happened after he did it. And that is where this stops being a story about one bad tackle and starts turning into something much bigger. Because if FIFA is no longer judging actions, but outcomes, then every collision, every mistimed challenge, every split-second mistake at this World Cup suddenly lives in a completely different universe. Not because the rules changed on paper, but because the consequences might have. The incident itself was brutal. There is no soft way to describe it. Medivo came in late on Ismael Cohn during Qatar's match against Canada. It was clumsy. It was reckless enough to be called a foul immediately. Cohn went down, and within moments it was obvious something was seriously wrong. The result was catastrophic. A broken tibia and fibula, a tournament-ending injury, one of those scenes that makes the entire stadium go quiet because everyone instantly understands this is no longer just a football moment. This is a medical emergency unfolding in the middle of the World Cup. And in that moment, the entire conversation changed. Not because people were debating whether it was a foul. That part was easy. The argument exploded because of what happened next. The referee's first instinct, according to the story that now sits at the center of this controversy, was yellow. Yellow, not straight red, not immediate dismissal. Yellow. And only after the scale of the injury became clear did that decision reportedly move upward into a red card. That detail is absolutely everything because it raises the ugliest question in the whole case. If Cohn gets up limping instead of leaving with a broken leg, are we even having this conversation? That is the part FIFA cannot escape. Because if the official on the pitch looked at the challenge itself in real time and saw something short of a straight red, then what exactly is the 5-match ban supposed to be punishing? The tackle? Or the image of the tackle once everyone saw the damage? And this is where the case becomes genuinely uncomfortable for FIFA, because the people who should be angriest about Medivo are the exact people who made the story more complicated. Ismael Kone himself reportedly did not frame Medivo as some malicious villain. Jesse Marsch, Canada's coach, did not come out breathing fire about intentional violence. Cohn even hugged Medivo in the hospital. Think about how unusual that is in a story like this. The injured player, the man whose World Cup was ended, is effectively telling the world this was not an act of cruelty. He is not defending the tackle. He is not pretending it was fine. But he is removing the easiest narrative FIFA could have used. He is removing intent. And once intent disappears, the suspension starts to look very different. Because now the debate is no longer, did Medivo do something horrible? It becomes, did Medivo do something that deserved 5 matches before we knew the leg was broken? Those are not the same question, not even close. That difference matters because football has always lived in the gray area between reckless and malicious. Players miss time tackles. They arrive late. They lose control. Sometimes they do something stupid without trying to injure anyone. That does not excuse it. But the disciplinary system is supposed to distinguish between dangerous play and deliberate violence. It is supposed to look at force, angle, studs, intent, pattern, context. It is supposed to ask what the player did, not just what the X-ray showed afterward. And critics of FIFA are now arguing that in Medivo's case, that distinction collapsed the second the injury looked horrific on television. If that sounds harsh, it gets worse, because this would already be a controversy even if Medivo's case existed in a vacuum, but it doesn't. There was another challenge around the same time that now haunts this entire decision. Brazil's Danilo was involved in a challenge on Scotland's Kieran Tierney that many observers considered at least comparable, and some argued it was even more reckless in terms of the action itself. And what happened there? A yellow card. No giant suspension, no massive moral statement. Why? Because Tierney did not leave with a broken leg. Now suddenly the optics are devastating. 2 incidents, 2 disciplinary outcomes, and the loudest explanation available is the one FIFA would most want people not to believe. One player got punished for the tackle, the other got punished for the headline. That is the trap FIFA has walked into. Because once fans start comparing incidents side by side, the governing body loses the protection of abstraction. You can no longer say, well, every case is different, and expect everyone to move on. People start freezing the footage. They start comparing point of contact. They start comparing speed, body shape, force, referee reaction, post-match commentary. They start asking why one incident became a morality play and another became just another booking. And once that happens, FIFA no longer looks like an authority applying rules. It starts to look like an institution managing optics. That accusation is especially damaging because FIFA has spent years fighting the perception that discipline is not always about fairness. It is sometimes about image, sometimes about tournament narrative, sometimes about who is involved, sometimes about what the cameras caught. And that is why Medivo's case has struck such a nerve. He is not one of the faces of the tournament. He is not one of the players the event is built around commercially. He is not the kind of star whose absence would shake the entire competition. Which creates a brutal suspicion. Was Medivo the perfect player to make an example of because the cost of making that example was low? That sounds cynical until you remember what critics keep bringing up whenever FIFA claims it is simply applying standards. The sport has a long memory. Fans remember moments when governing bodies seemed strangely flexible with elite names and marquee teams. They remember controversial suspensions reduced, softened, delayed, or navigated in ways that conveniently kept the biggest attractions on the field. Whether every example is fair or not almost doesn't matter anymore. The perception exists. And once that perception exists, Medivo's 5-match ban stops looking like a clean disciplinary decision and starts looking like selective toughness. That is the real danger here. Not just that one player got hit hard, but that the logic of the punishment feels unstable. Because if you are a player, what are you supposed to learn from this? Be careful, obviously. Don't tackle late, of course. But beyond that, what is the standard? Is it avoid dangerous contact, or is it pray the other player doesn't land badly? Those are wildly different standards. One governs behavior, the other governs luck. And football cannot operate on luck as a disciplinary principle without creating chaos. Because bad injuries are not always perfect reflections of bad intent. Sometimes a mild-looking challenge causes devastating damage. Sometimes a brutal collision somehow ends with everyone walking away. If punishment is tied too tightly to the medical outcome, then the system becomes fundamentally inconsistent. The same action can produce a yellow one day and a tournament-ending suspension the next, depending on a twist of the leg, the angle of the fall, or the fragility of the moment. That is not discipline. That is roulette. Of course, there is a counter-argument, and it is not a weak one. The challenge ended a Players' World Cup. It caused a horrifying injury on the biggest stage in the sport. FIFA has a duty to protect players, and if it goes soft on incidents with catastrophic consequences, it sends its own dangerous message. People will say intent is not everything. Recklessness matters, negligence matters. Outcomes matter because they reveal the true risk of the act. If a challenge is dangerous enough to snap a leg, maybe the game has every right to come down hard on it, whether the player meant it or not. That argument has force, it does. But it still doesn't solve FIFA's main problem. Because even if you believe Medivo deserved a serious ban, 5 matches is such a heavy punishment that it demands clarity. It demands a clear explanation of the principle. Was it excessive force? Serious foul play beyond the red? Endangering an opponent at an extraordinary level? Repeat behavior? Lack of remorse? If FIFA has a framework, people want to see it. If FIFA has a standard, people want to understand it. Instead, what they have right now is a result so severe that it has created more suspicion than confidence. And suspicion grows fast when the punishment goes beyond the tournament itself. That is another part of this story that changes the feel of the whole thing. 5 matches does not just remove Medivo from the World Cup, it follows him beyond it. It bleeds into future non-World Cup fixtures. That is not a symbolic slap. That is FIFA reaching forward and extending the damage. So now the question is no longer just whether Medivo should miss the rest of this tournament. It is whether one late challenge, judged in the emotional aftermath of a horrible injury, should be allowed to stain matches that have nothing to do with this World Cup at all. And that extension is what makes the punishment feel less like a response and more like a verdict on character. Whether FIFA intended that or not, that is how it lands. It says this was not just a red card offense. It says this was a serious disciplinary event worthy of a longer moral memory. But if the player himself has no record as a dirty repeat offender, if the injured opponent does not believe there was malice, if the referee's initial read was not even straight red, then where exactly is that moral certainty supposed to come from? This is where trust starts breaking down, not in one dramatic explosion, but in layers. First, fans stop trusting the consistency of officiating, then they stop trusting the consistency of discipline, then they stop trusting the explanations, and once all three go at once, every future decision gets viewed through the same lens. Not what happened, but who benefits from this version of events. That is a disaster for any governing body, especially during the World Cup when every ruling is amplified, every inconsistency is replayed, and every controversial moment becomes a referendum on the institution itself. Because Medivo's ban is no longer being discussed as an isolated punishment, it is being discussed as a precedent. And precedents are dangerous when nobody can define them cleanly. What happens at the next World Cup if another player makes a late challenge that looks ugly but causes no injury? What happens if a far more famous player does something similar and the suspension somehow lands lighter? What happens if a star from a major football power gets the kind of decision Medivo got? Does FIFA suddenly rediscover nuance, or does it stay hardline and risk damaging its own tournament product? That is why this story keeps getting bigger. Every path forward is bad if FIFA stands by the decision without explaining it properly. It reinforces the idea that punishment is being driven by optics and outcome. If it softens or walks it back, it looks like an admission that the original decision was overreach. If it tries to split the difference with vague language about player safety, it only feeds the exact criticism people are making now, that there is no stable line, only a public relations response to a gruesome injury. And maybe that is the most revealing part of all this. The World Cup's first disqualification was supposed to send a message about protecting players. Instead, it may have sent a completely different message. That the biggest tournament in football still does not know how to separate justice from reaction, that it still struggles to distinguish a bad act from a bad outcome. That when the cameras capture something shocking enough, process can start to bend around emotion. For Medivo, the damage is obvious. His tournament is over. His name is now attached to one of the ugliest moments of the competition. He becomes the player people remember for the injury, whether or not they remember the context. But the bigger problem is what this does to the tournament itself. Because once a World Cup starts handing out punishments that large in cases this contested, every challenge becomes a potential scandal, every injury becomes a legal argument, and every disciplinary ruling becomes a trust test. FIFA might not be equipped to pass, and that is why this does not feel finished. Not even close. The tackle happened in seconds, the injury was immediate, the suspension was announced. But the actual controversy is only getting started because the central question is still hanging there, unanswered, poisoning everything around it. Did FIFA punish Asim Medivo for the foul, or for the fact that the foul looked unforgivable once the leg was broken? Until there is a credible answer to that, this will not be remembered as the moment FIFA protected a player. It will be remembered as the moment the World Cup exposed a much deeper problem inside its disciplinary system. A problem where consistency is blurry, intent is negotiable, Outcomes dominate the conversation, and the line between justice and performance gets thinner every time the stakes get bigger. And if that line is already this thin now, with one lower-profile player in the middle of it, imagine what happens when the next incident involves a superstar, a semifinal, or a host nation under pressure. Because if FIFA cannot convince people this decision was principled, then the next controversy won't just be about one red card or one suspension. It will be about whether the entire tournament is being governed by rules everyone can trust, or by reactions nobody can predict.